Hi everyone, this is Rosie and welcome to my studio where we can explore creativity together. Today we're going to make a really cute doll dress. It's a simplicity pattern in Cricut Design Space and it is a tank top doll dress. I will be doing a step-by-step tutorial on how to access the file, how to cut your pieces, and how to sew the dress together. This video has been sponsored by Cricut, but all the opinions are my own. I do have affiliate links in the video description below. If you choose to use these links to purchase Cricut products, I do receive a small commission, but it's at no extra cost to you. So let's get started. First thing that you want to do is go and head over to the Cricut website. You will want to click in the top right corner where it says Design to get over to Design Space, and first you will need to log in. So you're going to go ahead and put in your Cricut ID and your password. If you don't have an account already, you can set one up right here and then follow the on-screen instructions. And once you're into Design Space, you want to go over here where it says My Ready to Make Projects, and you want to click View All. And then we're going to head up here in the right corner again, and we're going to click on this drop-down arrow to find our file. So it's a simplicity pattern. You want to click down here where it says simplicity, and then we're going to search for the tank top dress right up here in the right corner. So I'm just going to type in tank top doll dress and hit enter, and here's our file right here. So we're going to click on the file, and the pattern file comes up with instructions. It tells you that it's a tank top doll dress for 18-inch dolls. It gives you a little description of the dress. It tells you the finished size, and then it tells you what materials that you'll need right here, and then what other things you'll need, such as your cutting mat, etc. And under skills, it tells you that you need to have a sewing machine in good working order and that you will also be doing some hand sewing. Gives you a list of preparation. And then for the assembly, it tells you to click on the printable PDF file below. So we'll click right here. And now we have all of the instructions for the assembly. And we're going to keep that up on our screen because we'll be referring back to this when we're ready to start sewing. So let's get back over into Design Space where our file is again. And now we want to make it. Now note that there is a cost for this file. It costs $4.99, so you will need to purchase it. So go ahead and hit Make It. And then down over here is where you will purchase the file. So click Purchase, and then it prompts you for all the necessary information that you need to make your purchase. And once you've completed your purchase, it takes you right back to your project. Let's take a look at the project and see what our fabric requirements are. So the main body of the dress here is yellow, and then there's a little bit of trim at the top in pink. So for the main fabric, which is the yellow, you need 5/8 of a yard. And for the pink trim, you need a piece that's 12 by 12 inches. And then we need to pre-cut these pieces out before we can put them on the mat. So from the main yellow fabric, you need to cut 3 pieces. The first piece will be 12 inches by 23 inches. The second piece will be 12 inches by 22 inches. And then the third piece will be 12 inches by 18 inches. And then from the trim fabric, which is the pink, they want you to cut out a piece that's 11 inches by 10 inches. And for all of these pieces, they want the grain running parallel to the longer side of your cut. And if you look at the tip over here, they tell you precisely what it means to have the grain running parallel to the longer side. They're talking about the selvage edge. So the long side of your cut should be cut along or parallel to the selvage of the fabric. Note though that on the pink trim piece, they want the shorter end of the fabric to run parallel with the selvage. One other thing to notice down here is that the price of the pattern is now $0. Once you've bought a pattern off of Cricut Access, you can use it at any time at no additional cost. I've chosen to use the Cricut designer fabric called Garden Girl Sampler for my dress. Now, these sampler packs from Cricut come with 5 different cuts of fabric, and each cut is 12 inches wide by 26 inches long. And I'm going to use the flower fabric here for the main body of the dress, and then I'm going to use the pink for the trim. I went ahead and pre-cut all of my fabric pieces based on the chart measurements that we just looked at. And I'm going to put on my first piece of fabric. So this will be the 23-inch length. And you want to place it face down because we are going to be using the fabric marker. We want that to mark on the wrong side of the fabric. And by face down, I mean right side down. And then you're just going to make sure that it's nice and smooth on your mat with no bubbles. Okay. Now you have your other 2 lengths of fabric, so you want to go ahead and put those on the mat. And I am using the 12 by 24 inch pink fabric mat for the main fabric. And then for the trim fabric, I'm just going to use the 12-inch mat. And remember that they want the 10-inch side of the fabric to go along the length here. So just smooth it all down, just like you did with the other 3 mats. And then we're ready to start our cutting. One thing I do want to point out though is I always make sure that the edge of my fabric is lining up with this grid line right here. I don't like to have any fabric hanging over the edge because this is where the black rollers on the maker rides up and down the mat. And I don't like having anything there that can get caught up on those rollers. In order to cut out our pieces, we need to have both the rotary blade and the fabric pen in the maker. So to put in the rotary blade, we open the door here and we take out, I have the fine tip blade in there, take that out. So go ahead and take your rotary blade, and the rotary blade has gears right here, and there are also gears inside the machine. And the gears in here and on the rotary blade need to match up. Also, there's a plastic housing around the outside of your rotary blade. You don't ever want to take that off. So I'm going to take the rotary blade now and just set it in there. And then I'm going to close this door, and then I will close this door. And then to put in your fabric marker, there is a little arrow right here. So what you want to do is open up the door, and this little arrow will go down into the machine until you can't see the arrow anymore. But you always want to put your finger under here to support this housing as you push. And you're not pushing hard. And then you just close the door. Now that we're ready to cut, you'll call your file back up in Cricut Design Space. And then you want to go over here and just choose Make It. And it automatically loads your mats onto the screen. Now, one thing that you have to be mindful of when you put your mats in, you want to make sure of which mat you're choosing, because remember the main fabric has 3 different lengths. It's 23 inches, 22 inches, and 18 inches. So make sure that you put in the mat with the correct length. This mat that I have up on the screen right here is asking for the 22-inch length of fabric. So we're going to go and hit Continue. And it wants to know what kind of material I'm using, so I'm going to choose cotton. And then it just tells me to load in my fabric marker and my rotary blade, and we've already done that. So now I can go ahead and load my mat. Here's my mat with the 22-inch length of fabric, and when you put it in, you want to make sure that you're under this white guide here and under this white guide here, and you want to make sure that you're butting against these black rollers right there. So now we can hit load. And it's ready to cut, so we can hit the Cricut button. One other thing that you need to make sure of is that you have enough distance in the front and the back of the machine, because you are using a 24-inch mat here. So make sure that you have enough clearance for your mat. It's going to mark first with the fabric marker. Now it's checking for the rotary blade. If you don't have the correct blade in there, it's going to give you an opportunity to put the correct blade in. Now it's done cutting, and we just simply hit the unload button. And then we can go look at Design Space and see what we need to do next. Now we're back on the Design Space screen, and it's getting ready to load the second mat. So it wants you to make sure that you have your fabric marker in again and the rotary blade, which we do, so we can go ahead and load this. So at this point, you can go ahead and cut mats 2, 3, and 4 just by following your on-screen instructions. But again, make sure that you're putting in the correct fabric length for that main fabric. Now this is always the really exciting part for me, because this is where we get to reveal our pieces. And I'm always amazed at how perfectly the Cricut cuts everything. Just peel everything right back. And you can see everything is marked. So we have 2 pieces that are marked 9. We have 4 pieces that are marked 8. It gives you all the dots for matching up as you're sewing. These marks here are for the buttonholes. So now we just peel them off. Don't worry if there's a little bit of fraying. It is fabric. That's what fabric does. Okay, so those are our pink pieces. And this one right here was the longest cut. So again, just peel it back. Comes right off. You do want to do it a little bit gently. And now we have these pieces here. They're all marked for us with the fabric marker. So just go ahead now and pull off the pieces from your other 2 mats, and then we're going to start sewing. This is the instruction sheet for the doll dress. On the right side, they give you some general directions, and one thing that you need to note here is that all the seams that you're going to sew will be 1/4 inch. Then if you look over here on the left side, they give you a general overview of all the pieces in the pattern. So the front is pieces 1, 2, and 3. The back of the dress will be pieces 4, 5, and 6. 7 is a back facing. 8 and 9 are for the bands. That is the contrast piece for the front and the back. And number 10 is for the shoulder straps. Then when we scroll down to here, we see step number 1 for the construction. So they give you quite a lot for the first step. They want you to sew together the front and the back of the dress. So let's go do that now. We'll start by sewing the front of the dress, and the front of the dress will be sewn in 2 halves. Now, you want to refer to your instructions as you're doing this because it's important, obviously, which pieces you put together. The center of the dress has this double notch here. This is piece 1. And you're going to join it to piece number 2, and you'll know that you have them put together correctly by the notches. The notches is what tells you that you have everything lined up correctly. So we'll match this one notch to this one notch. Then this is piece 2 and piece 3. They get sewn together, and you'll know that you have them together correctly because of these notches right here. So you're going to take some pins, and you're going to sew right sides together. So we're matching up that single notch right there. We'll put a pin in. And know that you never sew over pins. Okay, it should line up perfectly. And honestly, cutting things out with the maker makes lining things up so much easier because it's so precise. When you're cutting with scissors, you're never as precise as you should be, and sometimes you have to finagle a little bit to get your seams to go together, but you're not going to have that problem with the maker. Okay, so we have piece 1 and piece 2 pinned together. Okay, and you can actually go ahead and pin piece 2 to piece 3. So let's do that. We're going to match up the double notches to start with. There's one here. And the second one is here. Okay, now that we have this side all pinned together, you could go ahead and pin together the other side exactly the same way. It's just going to be in reverse. And then I'm going to sew both of these halves together. I am going to be doing all the sewing off camera, but I'm going to show you every single seam that I make after it's completed. Here are the 2 halves of the dress sewn together. I used a 1/4 inch seam, and I actually used a stitch length of 2.0. Then after you stitch, you just want to clip your curves a little bit. The instructions shows you how to do this, but I'm just going to cut in a little V. So do this to all of the curves. You don't have to go all the way down the length, just where the fabric is curving in. And then when you're done, they want you to iron your seams towards the center. Now remember, this larger notch, this double notch right here, is the center of the dress. So we want to press the seams this way, towards this notch. Now this actually is the ironing pad for the Easy Press, and it's actually great for ironing on small projects like this. It's a nice ironing pad. And if you want, then you can also press the top of it a little bit also. Now do the same thing to the other side, and then once you're finished clipping and ironing the other side, you're going to take the 2 sides and sew down the center seam. So you'll put them together, you'll match up this notch, the 2 notches, pin in place, and then you're going to sew 1/4 inch seam this way. Now my center seam is sewn, and again I'm going to clip in on the curves. And on your instructions, they want this seam ironed open. Now, one other thing to note is if you have a serger, or if you prefer to zigzag your edges here, you can go ahead and do that. That is not something that I would do on a doll dress. So just open up your seam and then iron it down. Now, one thing also, very important, don't ever iron directly onto your self-healing mat, or you will be buying a new mat. They are not heat resistant. They're not meant for ironing on. But this pad here from Cricut is a great little ironing pad, so I have no fear of placing it on top of my self-healing mat. And ironing that way. Okay, so the front is now complete. There you go. Now we'll work on the back. So here's pieces 4, 5, and 6, and this is for 1/2 of the back. This is the center of the back. This notch here indicates the center. Also, you have these markings right here, which are for the buttonhole, so that also tells you that that's the center back. Now you're going to join piece 4 and 5 together, and you're going to match up this triple notch right here and pin, and then you're going to sew piece 5 to 6 by matching up these 2 single notches right here. So we're going to go ahead and pin those together. Now again, you'll be sewing with the 1/4 inch seam. I used a stitch length of 2.0, and I will be using the 2.0 stitch length throughout the entire project. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pin the last 2 pieces together. So go ahead and pin both your sides. Sew both sides together, and then you're going to clip your curves, and you're going to press your seams towards the center back. The only difference between the front and the back is that you're not going to sew the center back together. The center back will stay open. So there's 1/2 pinned together. You'll go ahead and pin the other half and do your sewing, clipping, and ironing. I just finished sewing the 2 back halves together. Remember that they do not get sewn down the center. The center back stays open. And I sewed everything. I sewed all my seams. I clipped them. One thing I didn't mention before is I always back tack at the beginning and end of a seam, so make sure you do that. Now the next thing that we want to do is sew the front and back of the dress together. So there's the front of the dress, and what we're going to do again is match up the notches. So this is the side seam of the front, and this is the side seam of the back right here, and I'm just pinning those together. So go ahead and pin both sides, and then you're going to sew with that same 1/4 inch seam with the 2.0 stitch length. I just finished sewing the side seams together here and here, and I cut out my notches, and I actually ironed the seams open. Step number 2 wants us to add the rickrack, and it's going to be added on the front of the dress along this line here. Now, let me say this. I like to have my markings on the wrong side of the fabric. If you prefer, you can put your markings on the right side of the fabric. It is a washable fabric marker, so it will wash out. But we need to transfer this line to the front of the dress. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew right along here, and that will transfer this marking to the front of the dress. I just finished stitching right along the markings for the rickrack, and now if I turn it over, I can see I have my mark right there. Now, to put on the rickrack. Okay. I'm using, this is from Wright's, and it is a medium rickrack. Now to put the rickrack onto the fabric and hold it in place while we're sewing, I'm going to use the Elmer's Washable School Glue Stick. This will wash out and your sewing machine will sew right through it. So there's no worries with using this. And I'm just going to take it and I'm going to put some along that line that I just sewed on. And then I'm going to stick the rickrack on it. And it will hold it in place well enough while I sew. And you basically want the center of the rickrack to be right on that sewing line that we have there. So just glue it up. And just place it all the way across the bottom of the dress. And then once you're done, you can go and take it over to the sewing machine and sew it into place. The rickrack is all sewn in now, and I did change my stitch length to 2.4 millimeters because of the thickness of the rickrack. Now, if you don't want to use the glue stick, what you can do is just put pins in along the way, or you can actually just hold it over the line as you're sewing. Either one of those will work. I just prefer to use the glue, but some people may not want to use it. So if not, just pin it. We are up to step number 3 now, which is to sew the facing to the back of the dress. So we will be sewing it to the back edge here, and it's piece number 7. So you have 2 piece number 7s. And you make sure you have the correct one. This one goes on the other side. Here's the piece for this side. So you're going to pin it together, matching up the double notch. And what they want you to do is sew a 1/4 inch seam along this edge. But when you get down here, you're going to stop where this marking is right here, and then you will pivot and sew right across here. The interfacings are sewn to both sides of the dress. So again, I sewed down here with a 1/4 inch seam with a 2.0 stitch length, and then I pivoted, and then I sewed across this way 1/2 inch above the edge of the fabric. So what they'd like you to do now is, if we come onto this side, you want to clip this down to about 1/4 inch. But don't go all the way to the edge of the interfacing. Leave a little bit there. So you see right here how I have this little tab? I don't want to cut this part off, but I do want to cut the little piece off of the interfacing. So actually I'm going to hold this back and then clip that. So the hem of the dress will come in a little bit past the edge of the facing there. And then you can also just clip a little V here out of the corner, and you also want to clip your curves. And then when you're done clipping everything, you're going to take your little sewing mat and you want to iron the seam open. I like to always use a little tool or something to help me open up the seam. And then just iron up the little bit of facing at the bottom. And then when you're done ironing that, you want to turn this right side out. And you can take your skewer or a point turn or whatever you have handy and just nudge out that corner just a little bit. Be careful not to poke through your seam like I just did there. Just want to nudge it out a little bit. And I'm going to give this another little bit of a pressing just to make it lay flat. And then iron it all down nicely. Then go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. And when you're done with that, they want you to go back to your sewing machine and just stitch maybe like 1/8 of an inch away from the edge here, just to hold the facing against the front of the dress. So now we're going to work on the hem, and this would be step number 4. And I'm going to use the glue stick. And what I'll basically be doing is putting some glue down along here and then folding right on this line. So I spread on the glue and then I can fold it over. And you probably aren't going to be able to see this on the camera, but I'm folding right on that line and I can see it from my viewpoint. And when you get to a seam, where a seam is, you want to make sure that the seam lines up, okay? You don't want it to go askew. And then after I have this all glued down in place, I'm actually going to take my iron and press this. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to go and sew right along here. Now, if you want, do a zigzag here if you're worried about the edge of the fabric. As I said before, I don't worry about that because it's a doll dress. If you prefer to pin up your hem, you can also do it that way. So go ahead and finish putting up the hem and then sew across the bottom. I have my hem all sewn down all along the edge here, and I used a stitch length of 2.4, and if you look up here you can see I stitched very close to the edge of that hem. Now we're up to step number 5, which is to sew the front band to the back band. So you'll just match up your notches and sew with a 1/4 of an inch seam. I have my seam sewn on the band and I pressed open the seams right there. So now the next thing that we need to do is pin this to the dress. So I have the dress right here, and we will pin right sides together. And what you want to do is match up all your side seams. So here is the side seam from the band, and the side seam from the dress is right there. So I'm going to start by pinning together my side seams. You can see I have the pin through the side seam there. And then you want to match up any notches. So there is a notch right here. So you'll match that one up. And you'll pin between the notch and the side seam. Now any seams that you have, you want to be mindful of which way they're going. So when you sew this down, you don't want to suddenly move the seam this way. Keep the seams exactly the way you iron them. And sometimes as you're sewing, you have to just check your seams to make sure that they're staying in position. Now I'm going to pin this side seam right here. We'll pin this side seam together. And match up the notch. And then pin in between that notch and the side seam. And then you have a few notches here. So there's a notch right here and right here. We're going to match those up. And then just finish pinning the rest of it, and you're going to go over to your sewing machine and you'll sew across this edge 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the fabric. This little line here is denoting the center front, so make sure that you're at the center front here. You can put a pin in there too if you'd like. So finish pinning and then go ahead and sew that 1/4 inch seam. So I have step number 6 completed here, where the band has been sewn onto the main dress, and I clipped all my curves and I pressed the seam up towards the band. Now step number 7 is to put the rickrack along the band here. So I'm going to put this on the same exact way I did on the bottom of the dress, just sticking it down with the glue stick, and then I will sew it on. Our rickrack is all sewn on now, and we're going to move on to steps 8 and 9. In step 8, they want us to sew the 2 shoulder straps together. So I have piece 10, I've pinned them both together, and I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam down here across the point and back up. You want to leave this end up here open. And then after you finish sewing it, you're going to iron open your seams, and then you want to turn it right side out. So you'll just take your point here and you'll just start to push it in just a little bit, and then take a skewer or some other turning device and just start to push the strap right side out. Then once you get it moving, just keep pulling down. And then you can go in with your point turner, and I'm using a skewer, and just gently coax out those points. Okay, and you need to do this for both straps. And then after it's all turned, you're going to give it a nice press. I have the straps turned right side out, and there are these little dog ears here. I'm just going to snip them off of each side. And then we're going to pin them to the dress. So one will go here between this large dot and the small dot, and you'll pin that one in place. And then the other one goes in between this large and small dot right there. Pin that in place. Then you'll take it over to your sewing machine and just baste it on there. Now we are going to start step 10. So you want to sew together your band facings exactly the same way that you sewed together the band in step 5. The only exception is that you're going to turn under the bottom part of the band 1/4 of an inch. And then once you've done that, you're going to pin the band facing to the band. And you want to match up your center seams, your side seams, and all of your notches. Now have the band facing pinned to the band, and you want to sew up this side right here with a 1/4 of an inch seam. You'll sew all the way across the top with the 1/4 of an inch seam, and then you will sew down this side with the 1/4 of an inch seam. When you sew down your sides, make sure that you don't catch any of the dress here. You shouldn't, but just be careful. I finished sewing the band facing to the band, and what I've done is I've trimmed down my corners. I've clipped all of my curves, and I've ironed my seam open. So now we need to turn this right side out. You'll turn it, and then we're going to give it a good pressing. So you can take your point turner again, or your skewer, whatever you're using, and just coax out the corners. And then once you're done pressing, you'll want to take the seam here that you've turned under 1/4 of an inch, and you'll want to do some hand stitching where you just stitch this down right along the seam line here. So just get yourself a needle and thread and just do a little bit of hand sewing just to tack that down. Okay, now we're up to the very last step, step number 12, which is adding the buttons. Now, again, since this is a doll dress, I do not put buttonholes on a doll dress. I would put them on if it was an heirloom doll dress, but if it's one that a little girl is going to play with, then I prefer Velcro. So I just take a small piece of Velcro and I tack it onto the dress. So what I did here was I put this into the sewing machine, I lowered my feed dogs, and then I set it to a zigzag stitch, and I just zigzagged back and forth to tack it in place. Then I take the opposite end of the Velcro and I put the button on the other side of it, and I very carefully place both pieces underneath my presser foot, and then I zigzag back and forth inside the buttonholes right here. And again, you want your feed dogs to be down when you do that. And then it's very easy for a little girl to just, you know, take off and put on the doll dress with the Velcro there. Now, you're going to do the same thing to this side here. You'll put this on, go over to your sewing machine, tack it down with a zigzag, and then you will add the opposite piece of Velcro and the button to this side. And then you'll do it also along the back of the dress. So however many buttons the instructions calls for, which I believe is 4, you'll just place them according to where the buttonholes have been marked. So here we go, we're done. You're going to put half of the Velcro pieces on this side of the dress, and then the other half will go on the inside on this side. And we can just close up our buttons. And we're done. Just wash out all your markings. Just some cold water should do the job. Well, I hope that you've all enjoyed following along on this video and that you're able to complete your dress. Please join me over on my Facebook page, which I will link to below. And please like and subscribe.